Welcome to the July session of CB4's Transportation Planning Committee meeting. I am Dale Corvino. I'm the co-chair of this committee. My fellow co-chair, Christine Berthet, is in France, and we wish her well. We also have two new members joining us today. We have Charlie Todd, and we have, where is Carl? Is Carl here?
Yes, I'm here.
And we have Carl Wilson. So welcome to both of you. We had a little intro session with both Charlie and Carl. Maybe each of you can just say a little bit about, tell the rest of the committee a little bit about yourselves before we get started. Charlie, you want to start?
Sure thing. Excited to be here. Charlie Todd, resident of the West 50s in Hell's Kitchen. Been to a lot of these meetings in the past as a resident to advocate for safer streets. And I greatly enjoy traveling around the city and the neighborhood on a cargo bike with my two children.
Great, thanks. And Carl, many of you already know Carl.
Yes, hi everybody. Good evening. Very exciting to be part of Transportation Committee. I think I know just about everyone, but if I don't, I am also a Hell's Kitchen resident. I'm at 54 and 10th. Became very familiar with the board and this committee in particular when I worked at the city council. No longer work there, work at a bid in Midtown, and excited to be here and to get to work with everybody to improve the street conditions in our neighborhood. Thanks.
Great, thanks to the two of you. And also this meeting is virtual by governor's orders, and it is being recorded, as you might have heard Janine mention, and the recordings of all of our meetings during this period are available on CB4's YouTube channel. Also, okay, I think that's all the housekeeping. So let's get into the agenda. First up, we have a couple of presentations on some pedestrian improvements and bike lane improvements in the district. Hi, Colleen, I see you're here from DOT. Is it Casey who's doing the presentation?
Hi, Dale. Yes, that's right. Casey Gorel from DOT will be delivering the presentation tonight.
Okay, so first we have Casey presenting for the DOT on the 8th Avenue pedestrian improvements and a bit of an update on 9th Avenue as well, and then we'll hear from Fornado. Casey, take it away. I think Janine probably has your screen. Yeah, or your screen sharing. Great. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Good evening, everyone. As Colleen said, my name is Casey Grell, and I'm a senior project manager at DOT in the pedestrian unit. And tonight I'm going to be presenting updates on a 8th Avenue project from 38th Street to 51st Street. Following that, giving a brief update on 9th Avenue near Moynihan Station as a bit of a preview to the following presentation by Fornado on their distinctive sidewalk plan. So a little project background. As everyone here is probably aware, 8th Avenue is a key corridor connecting Penn Station and Port Authority Bus Terminal to surrounding commercial, office, and entertainment land uses. Times Square Station is one of the busiest stations in the city, connecting to Penn Station, one of the busiest train terminals in the city, and then Port Authority Bus Terminal, the busiest bus terminal in the city. So huge numbers of pedestrians and huge numbers of pedestrian generators. For project background of what we've done so far, in phase 1, we expanded the sidewalk from 38th Street to 43rd Street. Phase 2 expanded the sidewalk from 31st Street to 38th Street. That implementation is ongoing. I know I'm going to give a brief update. We're working to resolve some of the issues that have come with that installation. This was one of the first projects that came from kind of the big internal restart of projects following COVID. So there's been a bit of a couple of speed bumps along the way, but we're working to resolve a lot of the issues with that project. And following those two phases, we still identify that there is severe pedestrian crowding north of 43rd Street. So that is what today's proposal is for. Looking at the safety data, 8th Avenue is a Vision Zero priority corridor. It's also within a Vision Zero priority area. There have been pedestrian severe injuries at 43rd, 44th, 47th, 49th, and 50th. And there was a cyclist fatality at 45th Street and a severe cyclist injury at 50th Street. So Definitely an issue with pedestrian injuries and also cyclist fatalities. Existing conditions. Currently, the blocks of 8th Avenue in this section have two 15-foot wide sidewalks, 4 general travel lanes, a parking protected bike lane, and the curbside uses are a mix of parking and loading with bus stops, hotel loading zones, and 3-hour metered commercial loading and parking. So it's kind of our very typical avenue layout in this section. Looking at who's actually using the roadway. So pre-pandemic, pedestrians accounted for almost 88% of roadway users, almost 12,000 pedestrians in the peak hour on this section of 8th Avenue near 45th Street. Vehicles about 1,300, making up 10%, and bikes a little over 300, making up 2%. We took recent data in June 2022 as businesses are reopening and office workers are coming back into the city, and found that even with quite a substantial decrease in pedestrian traffic, pedestrians still made up almost 82% of users, almost 7,400 people in the peak hour. So these very high pedestrian volumes and the associated lack of space, because pedestrians actually only have 30% of the roadway allocated to them, results in people walking in the curbside lanes. And this is typically people walking in the bike lane on the west side of the street. So our proposal, similar to other phases, we are proposing a large 19-foot wide painted sidewalk extension on the west curb, maintaining the parking and/or lane divider protected bike lane, maintaining 2 general travel lanes, and adding left turn lanes as needed. As part of this proposal, we'll also be making curb regulation changes to match the surrounding neighborhood context by extending the meter regulation to midnight to match those late night land uses. I'm going to be going in through this proposal in 2 block segments to kind of go over some of the quirks of each section, as not every block is the same. So starting at 42nd Street, where we have the existing sidewalk expansion that was installed in 2018, there's an existing split phase left turn at 43rd Street with the existing painted sidewalk. We're proposing to widen this painted space at the corners to improve pedestrian circulation. This includes making an adjustment to the taxi boarding island at Port Authority Bus Terminal. We'll be adding commercial loading spaces to the block between 42 and 43. This is to accommodate curbside uses and neighboring land use. We see a lot of trucks parked in that turn bay. So there's definitely a need for commercial loading. The bike lane then will transition at 43rd Street around the proposed sidewalk expansion that continues between the 2 existing bike islands. We'll also be maintaining the existing split phase left turn at this intersection as well. Moving to the next section, this is the block from 44 to 46. There's an existing offset crossing at 45th Street that was installed as part of phase 1. We're proposing to, again, expand the sidewalk on the west side, switching the offset crossing to a split phase left turn to separate turning vehicles from cyclists and pedestrians. And we will be maintaining the floating parking and loading lane in this section as well to accommodate those drop-offs and deliveries. Moving down the block again, there's an existing mixing zone at 47th Street. The proposal continues the painted sidewalk extension. We're proposing another split phase left turn at 47th Street, and again, maintaining parking and loading on the west side, mostly for commercial loading. Next section from 48th to 50th. Again, another existing mixing zone. There's also an existing city bike station in the floating parking lane between 49th and 50th Street. We'll be continuing the sidewalk expansion, swapping the mixing zone for split phase left turn. And here, because we're expanding the sidewalk so much, we can maintain the city bike station in its current location and add back some commercial loading spaces to try to mitigate double parking issues in this area. And then the final section is from 50th Street to 52nd Street. Here, again, an existing mixing zone at 51st. We'll be changing that for a proposed offset crossing, continuing a partial sidewalk expansion up to 51st Street, and then maintaining the floating commercial loading lane on this block as well. And then north of 51st Street, transitioning back to the existing cross section. So looking again at that kind of volume to space comparison, reminder that pedestrians make up 88% of roadway users. We're increasing that the space they get by 20 feet. So we're upgrading from 30% of the space to giving pedestrians half of the right of way. So project timeline, currently 43rd Street to 51st Street is currently milled and it's scheduled to be repaved by the end of July. Following that, we will be installing markings in August and September on that fresh asphalt. As part of this process, we're also going to be making minor changes to the Phase 1 design, which will be in coordination when the section of 8th Avenue between 38th Street and 43rd Street is repaved in 2023. So I'm going to be giving a brief update on those changes, which will happen next year. So this is the block of 38th Street to 39th Street. As part of Phase 1, we installed the painted sidewalk expansion, upgraded to a split phase left turn. And as part of this change, to better match the cross section to the south, which was Phase 2, where we had 2 travel lanes, we'll be removing 1 additional travel lane between 38th and 39th. This allows us to shift the left turn lane to put in a hotel loading zone and some commercial loading. There's a Holiday Inn mid-block on that section, and they see a lot of drop-offs and taxi use. So accommodating those uses allows us to keep that left turn lane clear and improve visibility in the crosswalks to the north. This will get the standard hotel loading zone treatment with a painted island, which will keep vehicles from entering the bike lane. So in summary, we're adding a substantial painted sidewalk expansion on the west side from 43rd to 51st Street, adding 3 new split phase left turns, installing an offset crossing at 51st, adding or maintaining commercial loading spaces to accommodate surrounding land uses. And as part of the project, we'll be adding bike corrals throughout the project limits. So at this time, I would open it up for any questions, and then following that, I can move into the 9th Avenue presentation.
Sure. Thank you so much, Casey. I'm just going to reflect some of the conversations we had earlier. So we talked earlier about the potential conflicts of the restaurant sheds that are in this area while the work is underway. Do you have any other than as I understand it, one of the restaurant operators has already been notified of the work, at least one. Do you have any more color on that topic?
So we're actually having a walkthrough with our open restaurant team tomorrow to go up and down the corridor. So we'll have more information then.
Great. And then can you go back to the slide that shows 42nd, I guess it's 42nd to 44th or? Right. So the proposed sidewalk extension is narrower along the block between 42nd and 43rd than much of the proposed area. Is that correct?
Yeah, so one of the comments at the previous meeting was to widen that space. So we actually ended up doing kind of large curb extensions with the painted treatment at both ends. So that kind of increases storage capacity when people are queuing for the signal.
Right.
So that was one change we made.
So those bulb outs are a little widened at the corners. Okay.
Yeah, it'll be 20 feet wide at the corners.
Right. And you mentioned that the block along between 47th and 48th, you're looking now at loading areas or commercial parking. I can't remember. I know we discussed those options. Yeah,
47 to 48 is going to be 3-hour commercial meter commercial loading.
Great. Okay. And then I think these plans, do they indicate along the bike lanes that there are the flexible delineators or other forms of vertical protection? Yeah, so wherever there's no floating parking, we're proposing the, it's called quick curb. It's the more kind of robust vertical separation that's currently in most of like phase 1. So we'll be doing that wherever we don't have any parked cars or any parking protection. We'll have a vertical separator. All right, great. I'm going to open it up to questions from the committee, starting with David Warren.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. I have 2 questions. One is on 8th Avenue, when I'm riding between 31st and 33rd, somewhere in mid-block, it starts out for the pedestrians, and even sometimes the city bike people block it off with stuff. and then we go into the bike lane. And then I'm confused because at about, let's say, at the light, let's say where 32nd would be, it wants you to veer back left to where the pedestrians once were and to go straight up. I don't know if it wants, because otherwise it would lead you into traffic, but it's very hard to finesse that the way the turn is and the way the cement dividers are. So I don't know how you plan to either communicate it better or move the dividers or what. My second thing is, I think the pedestrian protections are great, but what are the protections you're going to have for cyclists? How are they being, what is the protection? I hope it's not plastic bollards.
Yeah, so in regards to the first question, yes, there is. So there's the ongoing construction near 31st, well, from 32nd to 34th as part of the ongoing capital project on 34th Avenue and the Con Ed utility work. Originally, when we were installing the phase 2 project, we were working around the construction MPT, the mitigation and protection of traffic that the contractor had put out. Sometime in the last couple of months, that MPT staging area expanded. So we are currently working with our permit office to reduce that staging area to allow for bicyclists to return to the curb where the existing bike lane is safely, and update signage so that everyone's kind of aware of that transition. And then once that construction is finished, we don't have an exact timeline on that. We will be installing the full painted sidewalk expansion on those 2 blocks between 32nd and 34th, and adding the formal quicker protected bike lane. But we have to wait until that utility work is complete to finish those 2 blocks.
You say, wait, what do we do in between? Because it's very confusing, and cyclists' lives and possibly pedestrians is at risk because the cyclist doesn't know what to do. They're suddenly thrust into motor car traffic. So, I mean, it's easy for you to talk about this and deal with these construction companies, but technically they're supposed to, by law, maybe put in, even though they're plastic barriers that I don't like, temporary barriers, because it's very confusing. All of a sudden, you're telling us to be on the left-hand side because pedestrians on the right, then boom, you want us, and it's hard to finesse to get back onto the right. So, and that's where the danger is. If we stay on the left, we're in the middle of motor car traffic. So something needs to be done now. And by law, they're supposed to, these construction companies, put in a temporary bike lane.
Is that DDC work?
It doesn't matter whose work it is. It's
No,
still
David, I need the question answered, David.
It's part of a DDC project, but it's Con Ed work, contracted Con Ed work as a result of the DDC work. So it's not being led by DDC, but it's a utility relocation as part of a capital project. So we are going to be addressing the staging and allowing cyclists with a protected lane back to the original curbside bike lane that's currently still there. It's just difficult to access because the staging increased. So we're working to do that in the very near term, in the next week or two, to address that, and then have signage posted for cyclists to know that they are going back to the curb temporarily while that construction's in place. So there will, when the staging area is reduced, there will be access to the protected bike lane.
So you will take that up with DDC and or Con Ed as required for that work site.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your question, David. I thought you might also ask about the steel plates. It seems like there's a lot of steel, and we were hoping that cyclists didn't have to travel over like slippery steel plates. If there was some kind of treading that could be applied, or I don't know how that could be resolved. Yeah,
the steel plating is very extensive for this work, and it's something we can bring up, but it'd be an ask of the contractor to do there are regulations on the steel plates, especially when they're in crosswalks. So we can have that looked into.
Is there an applied treading that's used on steel plates?
I'm not sure what the regulations are. That's something we'd have to bring to our permit office on what they're required to do or what they can do as well.
Okay, I'm going to go to Charlie.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you for the presentation. A lot of great stuff in here. I think it's great to see that the mixing zones are being removed from this stretch. We do not like mixing zones, so that's fantastic. I know it was a mixing zone where the fatality happened on 45th. I want to echo what David said about the existing issues, really, from my perspective, from 30th Street all the way to 40th Street and the prior part, the earlier phase of this. And I just want to make sure that when we do this phase, that we don't have temporary markings on the ground for 9 months. Really, the past 9 months, biking on 8th Avenue, I almost exclusively go up 6th now, because 8th is just, it's incredibly confusing. There's no green paint in a lot of the spaces. There's some spaces where there's 2 bike lanes, as we were talking about in front of the post office, but also I think between like 34th and 35th for a while, there were 2 bike lanes. So it's very, very confusing. And I know there's a lot of construction, and I understand the challenges there, but I would prefer we take away a lane of car traffic and have a consistent dedicated temporary bike lane while the construction's happening, rather than having the cyclists having to go, not know which way to go. So I just want to echo that. I think you've already answered it, but I think it is an urgent issue, and I hope to not see it in this new phase. The other question that I had was, I noticed that the bike lane sort of bends and turns several spots throughout this, and it looks like the angle of those turns is not too bad, but recently on Broadway in the I think 50s and 40s, there's some kind of comical like 45-degree turns that bikes suddenly have to make, that no bike does, and it kind of creates a dangerous situation. So I just wanted to make sure that as the bike lane is weaving in and out, that it's not these sort of unrealistic harsh turns.
Yeah, this is definitely much smoother than the shared street treatments that we do. So those are more to slow all roadway users as the space is more pedestrian oriented. These are at a much more gentle transition, with the expectation that bikes would be able to take them at 15 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour.
Great. And then one final question. Dale's point about the vertical protection. It's nice to see that a lot of these designs have the little red dots that I take represent the harder plastic barriers like we currently have in like 40th Street or 41st Street. Is there any way to have any sort of vertical protection in areas where there is parking? Like, is there any kind of vertical or physical protection compatible with parking? Because I'm just thinking it's a commercial loading zone, maybe at night there's no one there, and there's a bunch of Ubers with tourists pulling in to these parking spaces and just going on into the bike lane or to drop off at a hotel or something. Is there a way for those two things to live together, parking protected plus a little bit of a barricade?
No, that's a great question. It's something that has been brought up by this board a couple times, and we've looked into it. And with our current kind of available resources, we don't have a good, for lack of a better word, product to use in those situations. With parking, there's a lot of concerns that if you put something that's not very tall, that it can become a tripping hazard because people are getting out of their cars and need to access the curb. There can be issues with interference with street sweepers and snow removal. So there's kind of a whole host of questions in adding vertical elements where there's floating parking. But it's something we've started to look at of like, what could we do aside from fully rebuilding the roadway to add some sort of protection for these areas where parking isn't consistent or it's very high turnover.
Will there be any planters or anything between the pedestrian space and the bike lane to sort of protect that delineation as well?
Yeah, that's something we've had an initial conversation with the bid. We need to have further conversations about extending planters here, but at a minimum, there will be the flexible delineators approximately every 20 feet along here. But I think planters and we are proposing bike corrals. Those are shown here as well, kind of near the islands. But planters is something that's a potential for this project.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Carl.
Hi, thanks very much for the presentation. as someone who has walked this corridor a million times going to and from work, it definitely is in need of this extra pedestrian space. I just had two questions. One about the scope of the project. I'm wondering why it stops at 51st Street. I mean, obviously, would love to see all this throughout the city, but along 8th Avenue particularly, right up to 55th is about where the theater district ends, and it is so crowded up there, especially when the show's let out. So I was just wondering, why the treatment ends at 51st Street.
Yeah, great question. So there's kind of twofold. So we took ped counts, pedestrian counts on 8th Avenue. We saw that at 51st Street, the volume did drop some. However, our pedestrian count data, when we do a count, it's very limited. We don't necessarily count at midnight when theaters are getting out, or we count typically with more standard rush hour times for commuting. So that was one partial decision. And another decision is the length of project that we can complete in a year is somewhat limited. So this section is approximately 10 blocks. And that's something we found is more manageable to install, mostly from a capacity and resource standpoint. That's not to say that in the future, if we do, if the board brings up there's a need for future work, it is something that we can come back and do in a next phase. There can always be a phase 4. But for each phase, we've done about 8 to 10 blocks per phase as we've gone through.
Okay. And just my second question was why only the west side? Because the east side is super crowded too.
That is also a great question. And one of the big limiting factors here is the bike islands that were installed as part of the original bike project. So due to the presence of trees, there's also the subway here is very shallow. And when those bike islands were installed, they were actually poured directly onto the top of the subway tunnel. And there was concern of, in our in-house resources, actually removing them about potentially damaging the subway tunnel. So we have to work around those islands. So that's why it's concentrated on one side, or else you'd have the bike lane would be weaving a lot. We also, when we put painted ped spaces on streets with bus routes, there would be a lot of cut-ins where there's bus stops because buses need a 6-inch curb to maintain ADA accessibility. So there would be kind of gaps in a painted sidewalk on both sides. But it's definitely a need that we see. And as part of, we've been working on what this would look like under a capital reconstruction, we would actually share that space to both sides. So each side would, if the street was eventually reconstructed, would get a 10-foot sidewalk expansion, making for 25-foot wide sidewalks on both sides. But we are limited in our temporary materials on what we can do for either side.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. I'll go to Blake next.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Dale, and thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if there were measures being taken to prevent bikes from going onto the sidewalk expansion, particularly bikes, for example, going the wrong way on the street.
Great question. Also something that we have seen as part of these projects, that we create all this safe space and people definitely use it. And sometimes they use it for things that they shouldn't be doing. And two-way cycling is definitely an issue. As of now, we don't have any specific treatments. It's difficult because to prevent people from biking the wrong way, you would put, things at each end of the painted spaces to prevent that, but then that blocks pedestrians from using it. So it's kind of this difficult problem to solve. And it's something we are looking at, but we don't have an answer today on how to solve that.
We have, as a committee in the past, asked that, we've recognized the DOT's programs that do seek to instill a culture of compliance, the Street Ambassador program and the bike safety kind of guidelines. But yes, the problem has become, and this will come up in other topics, the problem of, bike compliance has become an issue, and not just where there are expanded sidewalks, but in many parts of the district. Brett.
Thank you. So I very much appreciate that you're doing these sidewalk expansions. I'm walking on this commuting back and forth from work. So during rush hour, they can be very, very crowded. And many tourists might get hit. I'm not saying I'm the one hitting them, when they're in the way, but this definitely could reduce the number of assaults, accidental or otherwise. But I do have a question about the temporary nature of these, and that we've brought this up in the past when we do have these sidewalk expansions that are just paint. So the difference between an actual sidewalk and something painted on the street, when it's like this, it's 2 levels. So you do see people sometimes hopping up and down off the curb. I see people every now and then tripping on those curbs. It's a bit of a hazard. But the other thing that I think really makes the sidewalk expansion harder to understand, that there is an expanded area and it really interrupts the flow, is the curb itself, because it still gets treated like the curb. So we get a ton of sidewalk furniture, whether it's newspapers and the do-it boxes and all that stuff was right on the curb. So it doesn't act as one contiguous sidewalk. It's sort of like the up sidewalk and the down sidewalk, and it's hard to really weave back and forth and adjust with the congestion. What would it take to get these sidewalks to be actually built out? And is there a way to get the sidewalk furniture off the curb so it's not in the middle of these expanded sidewalks?
Great question. It's something we have definitely noticed, and that's partially why we are going so aggressive with this treatment to take ped space, because we have seen that where we have the ultra wide painted sidewalks expansions, which is different from like phase 1 where we only had a 10-foot expansion, is that they do feel a little bit more roomy and they feel a little bit more usable as a pedestrian. In regards to getting this funded, so we are working on a capital new need. So that is a capital plan that we then submit to OMB for funding. Of course, this is a big city and there are a lot of new needs that get submitted. So not everything gets funded right away. I can only ask that you pressure your electeds, and you as the board has a lot of voice in that of working towards prioritizing this for funding through the capital project. I will say that this is going to be a very expensive project. Construction in Midtown is very expensive, and the subway below adds a lot of expense. So it's definitely a big undertaking, but something that we would definitely like to see fully built out to reduce some of those issues you've noted. And then in regards to moving some of the street furniture, I think that's definitely something we could look at. We could even, since we're adding bike racks into the roadway, we could look at removing them from the sidewalk. And especially because they're usually the smaller bike racks, so they don't hold very many bikes. We could hold a lot more in the roadbed. That's one item that we could potentially move quickly. The do-it posts, fire hydrants, all those are so utility specific that they would require the full capital treatment to relocate those. But we could do an inventory of any DOT street furniture that could be easily moved to the curb.
Right. Yeah, and so Dale, I assume you took note of, we might want to consider putting this when we're prioritizing our capital needs requests and just whatever that might be. And then the other thing, and I know this came up at a previous presentation on sidewalk expansions, but with all these outdoor dining facilities being built, how can we be sure that these expanded sidewalks don't become expanded restaurants?
Great question. It's also something we are talking through as we work towards the permanent outdoor dining program. Currently, they are not allowed within painted sidewalk expansions. Sidewalk seating has to be within the built sidewalk. Seating that's in the roadway needs to be in the parking lane. It's something we're going to be talking about on our walkthrough tomorrow, and something that the PED unit is very aware of as we move forward with a permanent program, that some sidewalks are truly for walking, and we need to preserve that space.
Thank you so much.
So as it stands, the sheds would remain in parking spaces, not on the painted sidewalks. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm taking note of your comment about the cost of a capital improvement over a subway, as opposed to, I suppose, an avenue that didn't have a subway beneath it would be a lower dollar capital budget to make the permanent changes. Okay, just noted. That's noted. Tina, you had your hand up as well for this. Yes.
Yeah, quite honestly, I just want a clarification. When you start on a block, how far do you go before you completely finish that block to the point of resurfacing, including the bike lane? In other words, is there any way you can focus in on one area, do all the work, complete the bike lane, and then go to the next area?
That's a great suggestion. Currently, as the repaving process works, they do kind of a clean sweep. So they're in and out in kind of one shot, and then they can move to the next location. It's definitely a great idea as we create more spaces that aren't just cars and you just repave the street, cars deal with it, and then everything goes back and it's fine. We are creating, like, we have now a big sidewalk that needs to be maintained, or we have the bike lane that needs to be maintained during repavings. And it's, that's definitely a great suggestion and something we can bring up. But in the current repaving process is our repaving teams go in and do kind of one clean sweep of milling, a 2-week waiting period, and then repaving, which is then followed by the markings installation.
For the entire 10 block length, that's how this would be phased.
Correct, yes.
Right, okay. So the suggestion is, could we do it in 2 block, let's say 2 block segments, so 5 2-block segments rather than 1 10-block segment at a sweep. All right, I'm gonna go, I think that's a great suggestion. I think we actually talked about that. I'm gonna also, do we have any other hands up from the committee? Otherwise, I'm gonna go to a public attendee. Melody has her hand up, I believe, for this topic.
Viren has his hand up.
Oh, Viren. We'll go to Viren and then we'll go to the public.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to Brett's suggestion about making a permanent change with sidewalk extension. Is there a way to sort of think about using foam concrete and sort of to add to the sidewalk rather than sort of doing a whole structural change? But it's better than what you have in terms of painted expansion. Is that something that DOT can look into? Because it's been done before.
Are you saying just change the surface to concrete, or?
No, the piece that you're extending the sidewalk by, let's say you're extending a sidewalk by 3 feet. That particular portion, instead of doing regular concrete structural work, if you use foam concrete.
Got it. Yeah. So I get, so even, yeah, totally understood. The biggest issue with any of these changes is affecting drainage. That's usually the major trigger for any capital work, any reconstruction work. Catch basins are at the curb. If we make any changes to the curb with really any materials, if we're changing drainage patterns, we need to relocate utilities so we don't have ponding or street flooding, and ensuring proper drainage from the building line down to the new curb line. Drainage is really the big driver of when we do an in-house project in concrete versus needing to do it in capital. Because we do actually build quite a few sidewalks in-house, but it kind of requires that special unicorn where the drainage works and we don't have to adapt any catch basins or coordinate with DEP on any subsurface utilities. So that's the biggest hurdle for any of these build outs.
Thank you. Not very satisfactory answer. But what I was proposing, Casey, was to think of alternate materials rather than concrete, so that you can achieve the same goal of leveling the sidewalk expansion, but not having to do major structural reworking and rebuilding of the sidewalk. That's what I was proposing, because if you look at it, we end up spending money twice and still not get a very satisfactory sort of result.
But doesn't the drainage issue still have to be addressed?
It's easily managed, Dale, because now you're using foam concrete, which sort of works slightly differently, and you can still do your drainage properly. But instead of doing a whole structural change to the sidewalk expansion, you just fill in with foam concrete. I mean, it's a conversation. I'm not suggesting that this is a perfect solution, but there are solutions that could be looked into that may be a bit more permanent than what we are proposing.
Yeah, it's definitely something we've looked into, doing different strategies for temporary projects. I don't think we definitely haven't found the perfect solution for this yet.
Thanks for the question. Karen, we're going to go to Melody. Can you bring her over, Janine?
I'm here.
Great. Hi, Melody.
Hi, great to see you. Thank you so much, Casey, for your presentation. I'm so glad to see something happening here. I need some clarification. I have a clarification request and another request. Are we getting parking protection here? Is that what's happening, cyclists? Because if so, I have found just in even the temporary riding that I've done here that the bike lane is a little narrow and then we're going to get doored. So is this parking protected? And if not, can we get Jersey barriers? That's my first question. And my second question is, cyclists really need protection now. It's not only confusing, but even if you know what you're doing, it's hard to navigate. And even though it's not in this community board's area, 6th Avenue is being milled right now. So we have 8th Avenue, which is dangerous, and 6th Avenue, which isn't workable. So we really need some current protection. If we can't have Jersey barriers for a temporary solution, are Yodocs possible? I know they take up a little bit more room, but I think we really need some help. Thank you.
Yeah, so in regards to your first question, this will be essentially the same parking protected bike lane that exists now. We're really just moving everything out 20 feet to allow for the painted sidewalk expansion. The width of the bike lane and the width of the buffer is staying the same. So it's 6-foot bike lane, 5-foot buffer. Where we are switching to the split phase left turns, which is shown here between 46th and 47th, that will not have parking protection because of the turn bay. So we'll be doing the quick curb protection for the vertical elements. So there will be a parking protected lane, and it will be the same width that's currently there now. In regards to your second question, maintaining protection during construction is always a challenge. It's something we are constantly working on, and I can bring your suggestion to our team who manages when bike lanes get repaved and the process of managing those and protecting those. But as part of this project, we don't currently have we definitely don't have Jersey barriers planned for this project, as it's going to be parking protected.
Okay, whatever you can do to protect us would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Melody. Do we have any other hands up? I don't see any.
Yeah, may I jump in? I haven't raised my hand yet. So.
Sure, go ahead, Kieran.
Just very quick observation. I'm looking at the slide that we have on the screen, south side of 46th Street, the crosswalk, which is at an angle. Why the sort of side, which is on the south side, is not straight? Why not just expand the crosswalk and make it sort of, a little more normal?
That's a great question. Really, for that crosswalk, we're really working with what is currently there. So that island is currently constructed. We could straighten the crosswalk and have it flare. I'm going to actually use my mouse because that might be helpful. Flare it more towards the south to be straight. It's a little unfortunate because that's going to kind of lead you right into a tree. I believe the reason that crosswalk is shifted is because our current policy, and granted, these islands were constructed almost 10 years ago, so they're quite old and somewhat outdated in how we would design a street now, is we go from the front of the curb to the front of the curb to keep the crosswalk as close to the pedestrian desire line as possible. So it's kind of a little bit of a weird quirk from the historical installation of this project. But we can bring it up with our team to see if straightening that crosswalk or if flaring it would be good or not.
Also remain straight. The reason why I'm saying it's not aesthetic reason. The reason why I'm pointing that out is that a lot of handicapped folks, particularly the blind, when they sort of used to walking in particular ways, Manhattan conditions their behavior as much as sound and everything else. So it would actually be very helpful if it is kept clear and straight. Just a suggestion.
No, that's a good suggestion.
All right, so back to the, thank you, Viren. So back to the committee discussion. I'm going to say that we're generally supportive of the temporary sidewalk expansion and the protected bike lane and the changes to parking regs concurrent that are proposed here. We have our concerns that have been outlined by a number of committee members and Melody about the current conditions as relates to construction efforts underway and how the bike lane can be maintained through that process. We have our suggestions about phasing. We have our strong recommendations for bike lane protection as wherever possible. And do I have a motion in that direction?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
I make the second, but I also want to make sure that we put in safety for the temporary bike lanes as an immediate concern for us.
Yes, that was, I did itemize that, David, but I'll rely on all of you to make sure we've captured it once we write the letter, because I do want to have one section of this letter discuss current conditions with respect to the current construction enclosures and staging areas, so that the bike lane is maintained during that period. So yes.
Yeah, because I'm very concerned in this construction, staging and all that. These guys are weasels, so we can't let them get away with it.
We won't use the word weasels, but we will ask them to, we will ask that DOT, you know, bring to bear these concerns on whether it's DDC or Con Ed. So that's the motion. Can we have a vote on that motion? We've had a second. All in favor of that letter to capture our discussion? Any opposed? Any present not eligible? No. Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. I suppose now we can move on to your portion of the 9th Avenue presentation, then we'll bring in Vornado.
Then may I ask you one quick question, if you don't mind?
Yes.
Sorry. And we spoke about making this change permanent as far as the sidewalk extension is concerned. Will we be writing a separate letter about that?
I don't know if that's a separate letter, or if we can say we look, you know, within that letter, we look forward to the capital project, which would have expansions of sidewalks on both sides. And also to Carl's point, about like potential expansions to the north of the extended sidewalk. So yeah, I think it can be captured in this letter, and I'll rely on you, Viren, to read through it once we draft it to make sure that I'm capturing all your concerns in that direction, because I do think that's important. It's not these temporary build outs are not perfect, but I think they do set the stage for future improvements. Yeah. So yes. Okay, so Casey, back to you on 9th Avenue.
Let me get everything back. This one's going to be quick because Vornado is actually probably going to go into much more detail than I'm going to. Hello again. So I'm going to now be presenting an update on 9th Avenue from 30th Street to 34th Street. A little project background. There's been a long-standing DEP project to upgrade water mains throughout the district. I'm sure everyone's aware of that work. It's been a huge undertaking and probably a very big pain. There's also been the ongoing redevelopment of Moynihan Station on the blocks between 31st and 33rd. So I'm going to be showing here what is considered the existing condition, although that's kind of a bit of a misnomer because it probably hasn't looked like this for almost 10 years. But this is like technically, if nothing was changing, what would have been put back into the ground. And we are proposing a series of changes in coordination with the Vornado work to be implemented as part of the DEP roadway restoration from 30th to 31st and from 33rd to 34th. So currently working from south to north at 30th Street, there's an old existing mixing zone for southbound left turn onto 30th Street. Prior to construction, there was a USP access for a section of 9th Avenue heading northbound, essentially to what would have been 32nd Street. This is no longer needed with the change from the USPS Farley Post Office into the Moynihan Station. Looking at bullet number 3, at West 33rd, there was a substantial lane drop going from 5 lanes to 3 lanes, 5 lanes to 4 lanes. So a big kind of pinching of 9th Avenue, mostly to accommodate that USPS access. And then at 34th Street, there's an existing split face left turn. So under the proposal, again, working from south to north, we will be converting to an offset crossing at 30th Street and we'll be widening the eastern sidewalk and temporary materials. However, here at this location, we are proposing concrete islands as part of the DEP restoration. They'll be shifting the islands to their new position to allow for the wider sidewalk. From 31st to 33rd, Moynihan with Vornado will be widening the eastern sidewalk and adding the mid-block crosswalk. The mid-block crosswalk has already been completed, and constructing 3 pedestrian islands. They'll be presenting that after me, so I won't go into too much detail on that. Looking at the third bullet, between 33rd and 34th, we'll be maintaining 3 consistent travel lanes and widening the eastern sidewalk and temporary materials to create a consistent 9th Avenue roadway profile. And looking at 34th Street, we'll be maintaining the split face left turn. However, we'll be adding a painted curb extension to better align the bike lane to go around the new islands and painted sidewalks. So here's both, which I can come back to. Just a quick summary, we're widening sidewalks between 34th Street and 30th Street, creating consistent and clear travel lanes, and creating consistent bike treatments at intersections through this portion of 9th Avenue. So I can also open up for questions. And if you have any questions in regards to the blocks between 31st and 33rd, it might be better to wait for those once Vornado has presented.
Yeah, I think perhaps what we'll do is we'll go right into Vornado's presentation, then we can discuss it as a whole.
Yeah, that works. I can stick around. So
yeah. And who do we have here at Vornado? From Vornado?
Hi, Alan Reagan. Thanks for having us tonight. I've been involved with the Moynihan Station project since 2017, which is not nearly as long as some people have been involved in it, but I've been involved with the train hall portion and the private development portion. Joining me tonight is also Michael Grieser from SOM. SOM has been involved with all 3 phases, and Jake Eckersley from Langen. Langen has also been involved in all 3 phases of the project. If you guys don't mind, I'll start sharing my screen with our presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we have it up now.
Okay. So just an overview shot of the building. Everyone, I think, knows where the project is, but just in case, it occupies the full block between 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue from 33rd to 31st Street. It sits on top of the busiest transit hub in the country and is an extension of Penn Station. So green represents phase 1, which was completed. It was the initial entrances on 8th Avenue for the train hall that let you in on the concourse level. It was reducing some of the moat to allow pedestrian flow, bollards, and a mix of granite curbs, concrete sidewalks, and then within the bounds of the property, a distinctive sidewalk of a black Cambrian granite. And then that was completed in 2017. Phase 2, in the orange color, was completed at the end of 2020. That extended the bollards down 33rd and 31st Street and put the distinctive sidewalk at the 2 other mid-block train hall entrances. Just some completion photos of what was there, or what is there. This is the 31st Street mid-block entrance. This is the 33rd Street mid-block entrance. Just another view. Section through the building, showing it connecting from 9th Avenue to 8th Avenue. Connects over to Penn Station underground. These are the pre-work photos. That's what we like to call it. It wasn't the existing conditions because as you guys walk there today, you'll notice that the condition doesn't exist. But these are the pre-work conditions where USPS had the reverse drive lane on 9th Avenue, where they would come down 31st Street and turn up 9th Avenue to get to their interior loading dock that was effectively 32nd Street. As part of this project, we relocated all of USPS's loading facilities onto 31st Street and provided them a below-grade ramp, goes from the street down to the concourse to move all of this loading facility that was on the first floor down into the cellar of the building. That allows this area to be freed up and the sidewalk to be extended, and then these 3 grand entrances to be converted to the 5th train hall entrance along 9th Avenue. And it aligns to Manhattan West Brookfield's Park directly across the street. and there's a temporary crosswalk today where near where the permanent crosswalk would go. This is just another angle from 31st Street looking up 9th Avenue of the reverse drive lane for USPS. Just the overview of the site plan that existed previously. This area here, everything that's boxed out in red highlights the areas that have the distinctive paving. Everything, the two on 8th Avenue and the mid-block paving on 33rd and 31st Street, that's all within the property bounds. The building is set back and surrounded by moats on the north side and the south side, and the grand steps on 8th Avenue. The difference being is the building was actually created in two separate times. When the back building was created, it was effectively flush to the property line. So we're here for the community board to ask for the distinctive sidewalk. We're also giving you a preview of the bollards, although we know that we can't officially ask for the bollard approval until DOT is further along in the revocable consent process. But thought it was important that you guys, the community board, has seen this 2 other times, and we want to let you know that we're ready to start the work once we get through the DOT process for the bollards. So this is just a blow up of where the distinctive sidewalk is. It'll be 90 feet by 34 feet, roughly speaking, and it'll align to those 3 grand entrances that link 32nd Street to the train hall. So all of this sidewalk will be maintained by the condominium building. It's currently managed by C&W that handles all of the sidewalk and the interior, the common spaces of the building. Additionally, we will be extending the bollards that go down from 8th Avenue and on 33rd and 31st Street all the way across 9th Avenue. Part of this project is been a lot of back and forth because 9th Avenue has a ton of utilities in the street. It's also a shallow street because of the viaduct for the trains. So we've been working with Casey and John at DOT to work on geometry that works for everyone, along with DEP with the water main relocations. As noted previously, the building has standoff distances on 8th Avenue, 33rd Street, and 31st Street. In order to give it standoff distance for security measures, we need to extend the sidewalk. We're extending the sidewalk, effectively grabbing the reverse turn lane that's no longer needed, while still maintaining the bike lane, giving grander pedestrian experience here, security from bollards as well, and then installing the permanent mid-block crossing, which has been fully coordinated between our building and Brookfield over on the west side. This is just information on the material that we're going to use. This is just photos of the existing granite curbs. We're going to put back granite curbs. We're going to use the same bollards as phase 2 and phase 1 used, the same bollard covers, same rating. And this just shows the full extent and array of the number of bollards that we're putting there. We've worked closely with DEP to fit the bollards in over their infrastructure. Con Edison is doing utility relocates, which they'll pick back up after the summer moratorium sometime in, we hope, end of August, beginning of September, to allow us to start this work once we get through the final DOT process. Sample of what the bollards look like. Any questions, we're going to replicate the existing covers that are there today. Just showing a section through it and spacing of the bollards. And then I will say this is an illustrative marketing rendering. This has not been updated to reflect the DOT. So please, we're not doing the drive lane. It's a bike lane there, but it was the best photorealistic rendering we had showing the distinctive sidewalk. So pay no mind to the tables, chairs, and trees that are not part of our plan. It's just really just to show you how the distinctive sidewalk lines up with the main entrance and the mid-block crosswalk. I know I went through it relatively quickly, so I'm happy to go back to different slides or answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Alan. So let me just reflect a couple of these comments from the All right. So, couple of things. Just so we know that we'll ask DOT about the vertical protection for the bike lane, and I assume it follows the same guidance in which you're providing it where possible, absent where there's parking activity. And then also and this is again for DOT, we brought up the issue of the left-hand turn lane north of 34th Street essentially being squatted in by Midtown South for police vehicles and private vehicles. And it's not just the turn lane, they also squat in an active travel lane. So anything that you can do to address that, our requests have fallen on deaf ears, but it really does create hazardous conditions because regardless of the 2 lanes of parking that the PD has commandeered, people are still making that turn onto 34th Street. As for the bollards, Alan, can you go back to the plan that shows the corners? I just want to make sure there's no like interference of the bollards with the curb cuts for ADA accessibility. I know sometimes it has to be finessed.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Only to say we've encountered this before, and it's usually something that has to be finessed so that your clearances are met, but also so that the curb cuts, the 2 curb cuts in both directions are usable.
We understand. We've gone through great length and we'll continue to do so during the shop drawing and construction phase to ensure that they are usable.
Yeah, it looks like it, at least on this corner.
Yep. Yeah. Same on both. I can go to the other corner as well.
Yeah.
We've had to, in addition to all the normal stuff you have to go through, this part of the site is actually rather shallow, so it's even more complicated here, but we've been able to get it to work, and we'll continue to make sure that it happens that way through the process.
All right, great. And David, I see your hand up. I'm sure you have questions about the current conditions of the bike lane.
I certainly do. Thank you. There's several things that regarding the left turn on 30th Street, that has to be addressed now. That can't wait. Someone's going to get killed or severely injured because the motor cars do not see when they make the left turn. Cyclists. I ride that every day. I've had so many near misses. I've had more lives than a cat with this. So this needs to be addressed like today. However you guys are going to do it, maybe have them make the left turn from a wider angle, even during temporary, all this construction is temporary, whatever, fine. But let's not play around with people's lives. The second thing is the bollards. You put in plastic bollards from like 33rd to like 30th Street. A couple of months ago, it took us like months to get them to extend it because motor cars were parking in there because they didn't realize that it was a bike lane. I actually took pictures of looked like a construction truck between 30, I think it was 31st or 30th, actually running over the bollards and parking on the bollards. I contacted Dot. Dot said, well, that's not in our jurisdiction. I think if we're going to, and this is maybe Bernardo or Dot or someone else's wheelhouse, but we need to know who. If we are going to stop people from damaging or vandalizing these bollards, who is in charge of it? I have the photos. I sent it to Dot. I sent them to the local precinct. And Dot just basically said, oh, well, this is not in our area. And nothing happened. There should be some type of, especially since I took the pictures on 9th Avenue where you're talking about a truck parking on it.
Wouldn't that go to traffic enforcement?
No, because it's a vandalism or a destruction of property. By the time they see my pictures, the person is gone. So we need to, I don't know who or what, but we need to enforce that. I have the pictures of the fellow that parked there. So this way, otherwise it means nothing, because these plastic bollards do not protect us. And that's what you have there now. My question is, in the future, what I see what you're doing for pedestrians, you have those beautiful metal ones. What are you doing to protect cyclists? What type of bollards are you going to put there? Because even temporarily, those bollards that you have now are not useless, but they're not good.
That's the question for DOT.
Well, it's also for Venado, because they're putting up those temporary bollards. So maybe they can press charges with the cops that their property was disrupted if I send them the pictures.
Yeah, that was actually not us. That was DDC's project and DDC's contractor that put up. So all the work you've seen in the street to date has not been a part of this building. It's all been DDC work to do all the utility relocates. Dale, your co-chair reached out to me when there was a problem that they went missing, or they failed to install half of them. Just through our relationship with DDC, we reached out and said, hey, what's going on? And they came back, I think, a couple of days later to finish it. So I'm glad to reach out to my contact at DDC and say, look, tonight's community board, there was an issue raised, and see if they'll address it for you.
That would be great.
I do appreciate that. Thank you.
David, I'm just going to jump in. It's the maintenance of the bike crossing through these phases, and I recognize it's not your work, but DDC's has been spotty as the prior incident indicates, and we would appreciate any you raising your voice in that regard as well, and that goes for our friends at DOT. Alan.
Thank you, Dale, and thank you, Alan, for the presentation. As somebody who worked in that building many years ago, been quite a transformation. But speaking of bollards, the sidewalk bollards, and I know the committee has taken up the issue of bollards at different times, but this being my first time on this committee, I know the idea of not having these steel bollards has been discussed. Has there been any updates on other structures that can be used, planters? If you go around town, there are buildings that do have planters on the street. Can they be made to do the same safety and security situations that you need from these bollards by using planters, or maybe interspersing some of these steel bollards with planters? Is that a possibility?
We've looked into various different solutions for this. Because of how congested 9th Avenue is with utilities, we actually have to use various different types of foundations for these bollards to make them all fit in. And it would be infeasible to do so with planters or anything else, because some of these bollards, although they have to be removable, you won't be able to tell other than how you access them, to be able to pull them out, to get through and allow DEP to service their work, allow Con Ed to service their work. Planters, however, prevent that from happening. So that is why there's all metal bollards around this one.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Thank you.
Kieran.
I was just going to echo Alan's question. I think you've come a long way as far as protection is concerned, and bollards are not exactly the best sort of pedestrian-friendly solution. I think it's high time the city starts looking into that in a much more serious way, and not to simply sort of throw off the suggestions that planters or some sort of landscape strategies might help you achieve the same goal of protection and securing the building, while not making the whole place look like, whatever it does look like now, and it's making it more pedestrian friendly and sort of aesthetically much more pleasing. So I think this is a very large building. It's a pretty long length of bollards that you're going to be putting up there. I think for the committee, it's a good ask that, come on, guys, let's get together and put our heads together and find a way of doing something that is different than just simply putting bollards.
We can certainly make a request in that direction, Bjorn.
Yeah, I would tell you that it's taken us the better part with working with all the agencies, 2.5 years, close to 3 years actually at this point to get here. We've looked at every possible thing. I mean, look, from a beautification standpoint, do I think planters are better? Absolutely. But from a security standpoint for this building, given what it is, I can't get into between the infrastructure challenges that we have to work through, there were very limited options. I mean, we had raptor bollards on 31st Street, which I know are quite controversial. And I know the community board didn't like those, but that was the only way to protect the building. So we have studied various different options. It really comes down to what infrastructure we're working around to make it happen. I would say from a pedestrian standpoint, the sidewalk is now, I don't want to misspeak, but we're going out, it's going to be a rather gracious sidewalk. So the pedestrian and public realm improvements will be vastly improved in this area and plenty of walking space on 9th Avenue between 33rd and 31st Street.
No, I totally agree. But I mean, it's just the manner in which the bollards are actually hindering people's movement, and this whole pedestrian experience is actually hindered by it. And there are absolutely great solutions. If you really look at Midtown Manhattan and our district, the number of bollards in this district probably tops the list. So all I'm saying is that from sort of a pedestrian point of view and experiential point of view, I think collectively we should come together, and there are ways in which you can actually combine sidewalk benches with sidewalk planters with a whole bunch of other sort of solutions that do exist, and city has actually used them in other parts of this, not in this city, but in other parts of the world, those solutions have been actually used. I think we should probably take a lead on this. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Viren. Jesse.
Personally, I think weaving through bollards is an excellent form of exercise. So I don't know what you all.
I'll admit.
But this is actually just a quick clarification, and actually probably a question just for you, Dale, because I just want to make sure David asked earlier 2 different questions, it sounded like, about the current construction status, and his first question was about the turn on 30th Street. We were saying for both of David's questions that those are questions that needs to be addressed by DDC, and that our current presenters have no tornado.
Well, the signaling, the turn and signaling would be DOT. The insistence that the bike lane be maintained through all phases of construction looks like it's going to DDC, but our partners at DOT can certainly apply some pressure, and Alan at Vornado has offered and has in the past said, you need to keep on top of this as well. So.
Yeah, great. Okay, so sorry, and so can I just hear like a public commitment to that then from either one of you on just applying pressure to our other city agencies, specifically about the turn on 30th?
Can we have would it be Colleen or Casey? Can you address the left-hand turn on to 30th from 8th Avenue? It's been identified as a dangerous condition.
Are you talking about with the police parking at 34th or just the turn in general at 30th?
No, now we're going, I'm sorry. I did raise that issue with the police squatting, but now I'm down further south at 30th Street at the intersection, the east side of 8th Avenue, between the conflict between pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles turning left onto 30th.
Yes, so that was something brought up by the committee before, and
yes.
So the turn at 30th is going to be changed to an offset crossing with a concrete island. Also, as part of that change, we will be adding a LBI, LPI, so there will be a leading bike, leading pedestrian interval to allow bikes and peds a head start. I don't remember the exact timing off the top of my head. I'd have to look at that. And then turning vehicles will get a flashing yellow arrow in conjunction with that. So there's multiple levels of indication for turning vehicles to yield to pedestrians and cyclists. In addition to the concrete island that's being added, which really does help increase visibility and slow turns.
And all that is part of this scope, which you have presented tonight.
Yeah, part of the restoration through DEP.
Quote unquote restoration, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It does
All
sound
right.
like, though, from David's warning that that might be, as you start this, that might be something to be prioritized if it's that significant of a safety issue.
Is there a way to prioritize that, or like when you go and do the scope, can you start? I mean, that's a good question, Jesse. How to Casey, how would you prioritize that to say this is the most urgent need within this scope?
We would have to talk to the contractors doing the construction. I do know that they are laying out the islands for somewhat imminent construction. So that is going to be happening very soon. So there will be concrete protection in the very near term. The signal changes are going to probably happen towards the end. It's usually one of the last things to happen. And we actually need to coordinate whether that's going to be happening through the DEP project or if it's actually going to be an in-house DOT improvement as part of this geometry change. It's part of the alphabet soup of working on any project within the city.
Just remind us, what is the timeline, the projected timeline for this completion of this particular scope?
Outside of the Vornado work, my understanding is that by the end of the year, it would all be complete, but that's something I will double check with the contractor. They're wrapping up. They were very insistent that we get them the drawing to them as soon as possible. So. Okay,
well, that's promising. All right, Jesse, did you have any more questions, or else I'll move to Charlie? Charlie.
Thank you, Dale. Nice to see the improvements that are happening here. Thank you both for the presentation. I'm curious if we could just quickly go over the bike lane protections on these stretches now that we've seen both presentations, just to understand what they are. I know that rendering was did not include a bike lane, so just if we could kind of walk through. And then just one question, and this is maybe pie in the sky unrealistic, but we have these 200 beautiful bollards, and they're protecting the building and the pedestrians. It's not feasible to move them over and protect the bike lane as well? Like, could they keep the cars out of the bike lane too?
I mean, I ride home on 9th Avenue. I would love nothing more. It's my bike that I'm going to ride home from all the way downtown tonight. The amount of stuff in 9th Avenue within the street, there's the ability to put a foundation in there to hold something that would divert a car is, this is like a Swiss watch under the asphalt and pretty crazy. So
can we,
but we do have, sorry, to answer your question, we have concrete islands at both 33rd and 31st Street, and we have concrete islands separating the mid-block, and we have a buffer zone between, I think it's a 5'2" wide bike lane, then we have another 5 foot of striped area protected, and then the islands create another 8 foot buffer.
Can we go
between the first drive lane?
Is there?
Can we go back to the? I'm sorry. Can we go back to for visuals? Can we go back to the bike lane slide? That, I guess that was.
You could go back to my slide that has everything.
Yeah, that would be great. We can go back to Vornado's presentation. Yeah, perfect. Okay. I know we're pulling somewhat double duty for this phase, because
so that's parking in between the concrete islands is parking.
Yes.
Got it. So it's parking protected or concrete island protected.
And then for the questions of the blocks north and south that aren't part of the Vornado construction, for the most part, the block between 30th and 31st will be parking protected the entire length. It's actually not shown on this drawing, but the block between 33rd and 34th is mostly parking protected in front of B&H. And that one small segment where the bike lane goes around the existing concrete island will have quick curb, the more substantial protection or substantial vertical elements. And then there's also delineators between the ped space and the bike lane.
Oh, I see. So that's right up along B&H.
Yes, so parking protected for about 3/4, and then there'll be quick curb for the remainder.
Great, that answers my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Do we have attendees with? I don't see any hands
David,
up.
and then Melody was our next.
Melody, did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Go for it.
Okay. So I hate to sound like a broken record here. You might not be aware of it, but there's something in the bicycle world called a gender gap. And it has to do with the fact that women do not ride in areas where men do completely because it just isn't safe. I live in Chelsea. I haven't ridden 9th Avenue for 10 years. It is not safe. The pavement, the dump trucks, the concrete trucks, the bollards or lack of bollards. This is a beautiful rendering, and I really hope that that's what we ultimately get. Happy the building's being protected, and I understand you can't bring the bollards out. But while this is going on, we really need protection now. Jersey barriers are the only thing that I can think of, or Yodocs. Something should really be done. I'd like to be able to ride home right now. It's safer for me to ride unprotected streets to the Greenway or unprotected streets to Broadway to get home than it is to ride 9th Avenue. I just won't do it. So I'm begging you, please, either through the DOT or Vornado or DDC, to put some protection in for cyclists until this project is done on 9th Avenue. Thank you.
Thanks, Melody. All right, so it looks like we'll have, we can append our letter to the DOT to reflect our concerns about the current conditions, and also we can have a separate letter to Vornado, basically with some recommendations for considering other options to the bollards, with the understanding that as a transportation asset, this has to have certain there are certain security requirements in place that are hard to avoid.
I just have a quick question, because
sure, David.
I raised the question about the bollards being destructed or vandalized. Who do I go to send the photos that I have? Because I need help here, because I have a photo of a vehicle running them over and parking on them. And I think
those are
if we don't
they're
enforce it, this is going to happen.
David, can I clarify something? Are they running over the flexible delineators? What are they running over?
Yeah, they're running over those flexibles, those are flexible. That's what we have there. That's they're running over. And I'd also like to put
because you
in
said
the letter.
bollards, which I think just confused everyone. Okay, so I think that would be, if I understand this correctly, maybe Casey, you can help me out. That would, in that instance, that would be, wouldn't that be an enforcement issue?
It's Colleen. It's
Colleen.
partial. It's twofold. It's an enforcement issue, and we would replace the flexible delineators. We keep replacing them once they get damaged.
Well, I would clarify though that these are, I'm pretty certain were installed as part of a construction mitigation through the DDC project. So they would be as part of the DDC and their contractor for doing this work.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about replacement. I'm talking about going after the person that actually did it. I have the license.
It's an enforcement issue, David.
Because this will be a continuous problem. If this person is gone after, fined or whatever, then it'll get around that, hey, don't do this. Otherwise, it's bullshit. The other thing is, if we can, while they're doing construction, get rid of those plastic delineators and put up Jersey barriers tomorrow. That's what we need. That's what needs to be done, and I'd like to put that in the letter.
This is something that we can take back to DDC and have them look at it.
But how long are they going to look?
David, we're going to put that in our letter. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
The only thing I would, sorry, Dale, if you,
go for it.
I would just like to say that although Vornado is presenting this, the Farley building as a condominium, so whatever is sent to Vornado will have to discuss with the condominium board and voted on for things like changes to the security bollards or plans to that.
When you say that Farley building is a condominium, you're saying that Vornado kind of manages or governs the condo, the building on behalf of a condo association?
We're the developer of the building, so we oversaw the construction of phase 2, the train hall, and phase 3, the private side. So the sidewalk is being completed as the last phase 3 of the building. So there's a Amtrak, USPS, MTALIR, all our stakeholders in the building. So Vornado can't make a carte blanche decision, but we can certainly present things and try to sway the condominium board to agree to any proposed changes.
Understood. Thank you for that clarification. All right, so we're looking at a letter to DOT to raise the concerns that have been raised with regards to the current conditions and with their plan as they are proposing to implement it, and a separate letter to Vornado with respect to their sidewalk treatment and the bollards. On the first letter, do we have a motion?
So moved.
And a
I
second?
second.
Yeah. Okay, all in favor? And again, I'm going to count on you to make sure we capture all of the concerns that have been raised in this meeting. And any opposed? Any opposed? Any P&Es? Present not eligible? No. Okay, and as to the letter to Vornado with respect to their presentation on the sidewalk treatment and the bollards with some language to suggest looking at other technologies or other implementations of security bollards that are more pedestrian friendly. Do we have a motion?
Make the motion.
Second. Okay, so all in favor of that letter? And any opposed? Any P&Es? No, nobody here works for any except me once upon a time. Okay, thank you very much to Alan and to Casey. And we're going to, Colleen, are you sticking around for the next agenda item?
Yes, Dale, I'm here.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you all.
And thank you for the robust discussion. And I'm going to move on to the next item, which is, I don't have it in front of me, but I know what it is. It's Dyer Avenue and 42nd Street, the crossing. We had some neighbors, some residents of the area who are very concerned about the safety of that crossing, trying to get across Dyer at 42nd Street and even across 42nd Street at the pedestrian crossings to the east and west. And I think there was a request made by one of the local residents for some additional signage, which the DOT indicated was not within, their standards. We also have a couple of, I'm going to read this because unfortunately this is a resident of one of the neighboring buildings by the name of Stan Rozicki, who was involved in a pedestrian accident at that crossing and he was unable to attend. I was crossing 42nd Street at the end of Dyer in the crosswalk with the light, and an SUV came down Dyer, making a left turn onto 42nd Street and struck me, and he basically flew 10 to 15 feet in the air and sustained those injuries. And I think we have to also recognize that part of what's going to need to happen in resolving some of these issues is to go to the Port Authority because it's Dyer Avenue. So this is traffic coming up Dyer to that T intersection, and there's three things. There's the traffic. There's multiple lanes of traffic. There are drivers turning left onto 42nd Street. There are drivers turning right onto 42nd Street. And then there's also a bus contra lane where buses can turn right from 42nd Street down Dyer. So this is, and then again, we had another letter from another resident, Carol Lipnick, who expressed her her interest in making this a safer pedestrian crossing. So, Colleen, have I summarized the conditions at this intersection, and what would you what can you add to the discussion that we're going to have about this?
So Dale, I think we would need to have a discussion with the Port Authority as well, because Dyer Avenue is that's under their jurisdiction. But in terms of, we can look at, you know, the current signal timing to see what we have there. It seems like the pedestrian had the right of way, but the motorist failed to yield to the pedestrian, from what you're describing to me.
That is the case in the specific instance that was outlined by one of the residents. We also have had some discussion about even closing that portion of Dyer Avenue, making it diverting the turns off of 42nd Street to either 40th and 41st, keeping the bus contra lane intact, and at least improving the crossing of, you know, the pedestrians who need to cross Dyer from 42nd Street. So yeah, we can definitely bring this up. We definitely need to bring this up with Port Authority. I see one hand up from Elizabeth. Do we have any input from any of the committee members on this topic? And then I'll go to Elizabeth.
I do, Dale.
Yes, go.
I think I was in our session when we were doing our little meet and greet. I think we were talking about intersections where the signal, where it's red at all corners, and which allows. This seems to me like a really smart place to do something like that, where, you know, traffic, because that intersection is the worst, especially, you know, depending on what time of day it is, the traffic coming out of the tunnel there, it can. So, you know, I'm wondering, and I think there is, Colleen, I think there's a term for it. I don't remember what.
Barn stands.
Yeah, the barn stands. I think there are there others in Manhattan, and, you know, could this be maybe looked at as a spot to try something like that? Because I don't know if there's any in Community Board 4.
Hi, Carl. Nice to see you.
Hi.
We have quite a few in the city. We have one at Chambers Street, near us, near the Center Street building. We do have quite a few. I don't know off the locations, but, you know, this is a recommendation I can take back. But in the meantime, we would still need to have the Port Authority included in the discussion.
Sure. Yeah. But I do think that's a good place to start in terms of signalizing the intersection for better pedestrian safety. Elizabeth, do you have a comment on this topic? Yes.
First of all, thank you. I really appreciate the advocacy that is going on behind the scenes that I really had no clue about as a Manhattan resident. I appreciate you all for looking out for the pedestrians and cyclists. And I took carte blanche, and thank you, Jesse. I kind of deluged you with emails about the, of videos of this intersection trying to cross the street. And then Janine, if you're on the call, I just told residents in my building who couldn't attend the meeting to email you. So I hope it was okay that I did that. And I think some of them did. So Stanley, the elderly gentleman whose letter you read part of, lives in my building, and he's not computer savvy, and he has some help today, so he couldn't attend. But there's another woman who was also hit and is actually still suffering from the injuries from that accident. But I just didn't have enough time to find her and get her to, I don't know, maybe she's away. So I proposed, I wrote a letter to the city in 2018 asking for flashing lights or something. And they said they couldn't do it because the signage would be distracting, because the cars need to know what traffic signs to follow, especially with the bus lane that changes during rush hour. And so many other things. And they said it was an enforcement problem, right? But there's only a traffic officer there, sometimes in the morning and sometimes mid to late afternoon. And half the time they're on their cell phone in the corner in the shade, or they're looking the other way, or not responding to the pedestrians. So there are a number of people in my building that when I found out I was invited to come to this meeting, I said, do you have any issues with the intersection of 42nd and Dyer and crossing the street and whether or not it's safe? And they said, no. And why do you ask? And then I'd say, well, I've done some advocacy work and they're willing to hear our concerns. And they would say, oh, that intersection is crazy. It's the worst intersection. And I'm like, so you do have issues? Oh yeah, it's crazy. The drivers don't yield. And so people are just really complacent. They don't think that change can happen, but there are way more people upset with the intersection, but they're, but the cars aren't yielding to the pedestrians. So some of the other suggestions could be, as you suggested, a change in the signal timing, a speed limit, cameras in the intersection. There's so much blocking of the box and illegal right turning on red. I feel like New York's debt problems could be solved by having a camera that can ticket in that intersection. And perhaps diverting traffic on 41st Street, like everyone who wants to turn right can turn on 42nd Street, and everyone who wants to turn left can turn on 41st and go up 10th. There's so many ways we could reroute, or an all four cross and allow jaywalking. Anyway, I'm sure you're much more equipped to come up with solutions than I, but.
Well, I think you've laid out the array of possible solutions, and I think we need to take, and thank you so much for bringing this to us. And by the way, just to clarify, are you in the MEMA building?
I'm in the MEMA building. I've lived here since 2011.
And that building, do you have a count on the number of residential units in that building alone?
There's 900 something.
Yeah, so we're talking about a 900 unit residential building at this intersection, along with all the other functions that happen in the theaters. There's theaters on either side, and everything else that's happening along this stretch. So I think we can look.
There's a building, there's also a building on the east side of 42nd and Dyer, a large building.
So I think we can look at this and just take a multi-prong approach and say, we'd like, DOT to look at signalization options. We'd like to engage the Port Authority to discuss, some lane closures or some rediversion of traffic off the tunnel. Because the other thing and also look at more robust enforcement, because the thing that's happening is it's drivers who are in long distance mode, who are coming off the tunnel and thinking that they're just going to continue traveling the way they've been traveling on Jersey's highways, and they hit 42nd Street and they haven't had that shift in, I'm in the middle of a dense city and need to bring my speed down and need to mind for pedestrians. So I think it is a failure on many levels, and it does involve us bringing it to both DOT and to Port Authority in order to get a full resolution. So I would like to look at all the options, whether it's signalization, whether it's more enforcement, whether it's, as Colleen, whether it's a barn stance, or whether we get into a discussion with PA about redirecting some of the traffic that's coming off the tunnel. But again, thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you. I really appreciate all you're doing for us.
Any more comments or questions from the committee? So I think what we're looking at is a multi-prong letter, or with a lot of CCs to say, there's an urgent matter at the intersection of the T intersection of 42nd and Dyer, which can be addressed in a number of ways, and make sure we bring in the Port Authority on it and outline all of these possible solutions that we've discussed tonight. Wow, it's going to be a busy letter writing period. So do we have a motion for that letter, which would go to DOT and to Port Authority and capture some of the experiences and raise make sure that it's noted that there's a 900 unit residential building at the corner and the residents have, suffered injuries at the intersection.
Motion to adopt.
Yes, thank you, Tina. And a second?
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Any P&Es? All right, great. Thank you so much. Now, I want to make everybody aware of this because, you know, we're all volunteer labor, right? But there's a number of us, including Alan Osser, who's also new to the committee. Alan, I didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself, but here is your chance to introduce yourself. There are a number of committee members who are working on in a separate sanitation working group. And Christine is also on the working group, who have come up with a series of recommendations, which I think should be, the latest version should be in the Dropbox. And because it's a working group as a part of the full board, and it does have transportation impacts, we are reviewing it as a committee, and then it'll eventually, like, everybody's comments and suggestions and we'll go back to exec, and there'll be like a it'll be brought up in exec the next time exec meets. So Alan, do you want to introduce yourself real quick and then just let us take us through this sanitation, the recs of the sanitation working group?
Sure. Thank you, Dale. Alan Oster. I've been a member of Community Board 4 for about 6 years. I co-chair the Arts, Culture, Education, and Street Life Committee. Along my committee members from this group, David, Warren, and Blake, are active members there also. So we, on a lot of matters, we kind of like step on each other's toes a little bit. We've been working together on some of these different items, especially garbage. Varen was on the committee, on the sanitation committee. We had Katie Savage from the public who was on, who contributed quite a bit to it. So I feel like I'm stepping into some big shoes here and trying to do this, but
we also had David Solnick, who's on this committee.
And David Solnick, absolutely. I wanted to mention and give him a shout out.
He's away this time, but
just a little bit of background.
Kieran, are you also on the committee? So we have a lot of good buy-in on this committee on this issue. Yeah.
Back in April of 2020, David Solnick and an intern that we had at the time came up with a huge proposal, which is in the Dropbox for your reading enjoyment. I just wanted to read to you what the project focus was of this. And that was mandating in-building sanitation guidelines for new upcoming multi-unit high-rise residential development in Manhattan Community Board 4. Okay. So that was in 2020. Recently, in 2022, it just so happens to be dated April also, the city now has a ruling and has adopted certain regulations. Adoption of final rule relating to building waste management plans for certain buildings. So I guess we were in the forefront here. So Janine, if you have the form, if you could put that on the screen, if you have that, we just go through what we came up with.
I'm sorry, which one did you want me to share?
The new one, please.
Okay.
Now, just a comment, what we're dealing here with basically is storage. We have other proposals going out. We have a pilot program coming up in October that is going to place bins in the street, various locations on 45th Street between 9th and 10th, which will be for superintendents, building personnel who put garbage into these bins at the proper time. And sanitation can collect them from the other side of the bin, thereby getting the garbage off the sidewalk.
Sorry, my internet's a little slow. It's loading.
Okay.
Okay.
Basically, what we felt, or one of the reasons why we came up with this, was once we got this notice from the city, we found it to be somewhat lacking of a lot of detail. And also it revolved around buildings where the units were 150 units or more. We felt that that number was too high of a starting point for what we felt was a definite need to create storage in new buildings and buildings that are going to be rehabbed.
Here we go.
Here we go. So the goal, as you can see, is to define policies and methods to enhance the handling and storage of waste inside buildings, to minimize the use of large sidewalks for waste storage. While sanitation has initiated the Clean Curves pilots, waste management within buildings really never got a lot of attention. So we had, I would say, about 8 sessions. We had different agencies coming in at different times. We had folks in the public. We tried to get labor unions and building staff to come in to speak about this, but we couldn't do that. And Jesse was a prime pusher in trying to get the committee to formulate a proposal that we can present to the city for adoption. Next one, please. So our basic recommendations, and what we'd like, as you can see, there's been some changes made. We're talking to several different committees, so please send in your comments and letters to Christine and to David, and we'll try to incorporate these into the final project. Waste compacting and paper baling. Basically, most buildings of a certain unit size at one time were required to have compactors. Unfortunately, enforcement is lax, and what you have are these, loose bags of garbage that go out. And of course, compacting would reduce the size of these garbage bags. These sausage bags that you may see in some of these buildings would compact more garbage, less bags on the street. The other issue that we're trying to propose is baling of cardboard. Instead of having cardboard sometimes being put out wrapped up in tape, or wrapped up in rope, or sometimes in plastic bags, that baling machines will consolidate, keep them tight, as opposed to having them picked up and wound up on the street as sanitation flips them into the back of the trucks. Rodent-proof containers. Trash being put out should be placed in sealed containers opened by sanitation workers. This was done many, many years ago. It worked well then. Somehow we got away from containers and into plastic bags. We're trying to perhaps go back to the good old days. A waste management plan. The current plan provides little predictability to architects and developers. Minimum space requirements we're looking for is that buildings be able to store in a safe and sanitary location a week's worth of trash and recycling, and also composting. During the winter time, when there's no collection, these bags just keep piling up on the sidewalk. Makes it difficult for sanitation to clear the streets, for people to clear the sidewalks, and it just becomes a huge mess, especially during times where it might be holidays, it might be, for some reason, sanitation cutbacks. We want to be able to store this in safe conditions. Staging area accessible to the street. Commercial buildings primarily use loading docks, which obviously would not be applicable for residential, but we're looking for a different type of pickup from sanitation, especially in the larger buildings. Something similar to a loading dock where a sanitation truck can back its way in, pick up the garbage, and then leave the premises and not have to have the garbage, especially in the larger buildings, on the sidewalk. An interesting story with when garbage goes out. 4 o'clock is the time that garbage is supposed to go out. Usually it goes out much earlier than that. We're asking sanitation to move that to a later date, a later time, 8 o'clock, which means it'll go out probably a little bit earlier than that. It seems that in certain parts of New York, certain communities requested an earlier startup time for religious purposes. And instead of maybe carving out that particular location, area, community, it became a citywide time for trash put out. Next slide, please, Janine. So basically, these are some of the requirements that we're looking for in new and renovated buildings. Design requirements, interior or contained waste storage space sufficient for 1 week of waste. And these are for smaller buildings, 10 units or less. Waste compacting and paper baling in new construction. These smaller buildings were never built with chutes for compacting. It would not be probably maybe not sufficient for them to be able to put this in now, but we're asking them to put in if they can. Of course, in the medium buildings, 11 to 99 units, and in the larger ones, waste storage space, paper baling machines, compactors, waste management plan with detailed regulations for trash room, for staging containers, and how is garbage and trash and recycling going to leave the building in both cases. Operation requirements, compact waste and bale of paper, rodent-proof containers, waste either on site, on the curb, or put out at 8 p.m. later. Same for the other buildings. What's interesting, when we did the surveys, and you'll probably see it later on in the proposal, CB4, 61% of our buildings fall into the smaller categories. 20% of the buildings are in the middle range, and then only 20% of the buildings are in the larger range, but they put out the most garbage. But being that we have so many smaller buildings, 4-story, 5-story co-ops, condos, multi-families, they put out garbage. They put out less garbage than a larger building, but they do take up the sidewalk. So we're asking them to, new buildings and in renovated buildings, to consolidate, to use compactors and baling machines. Next slide, please. Janine. So in existing buildings, we can't ask them to go in and put compactors in. It may not be financially doable for them to purchase and maintain baling machines, but these should be done in the medium and in the larger buildings. One thing we talked about in terms of compactors, especially in the new buildings, they do have compactors now that will automatically separate the various different trash and recyclables that go down the chute. A lot of the buildings that were built earlier, when they did start to put in compactors, were just for trash. You threw your trash down, and then you put your garbage in the compactor room, and somebody came around and collected. The newer buildings that are constructed should have the technology exists for them to put in chutes that change by the press of a button to accept cans, glass, and maybe even sometimes paper. Next slide, please. So these are some of the policy changes that we're asking for. For larger buildings, require a waste staging area that is accessible from the street, require compacting and baling equipment, transfer enforcement of compacting and baling operations from Department of Buildings to Department of Sanitation. Provide clearer guidelines. DSNY should provide clearer guidelines for waste management, publish clear, specific, and enforceable requirements for the waste management plan. We should take into account the size of the rooms, the number of larger units, smaller units, in terms of what sort of account that they're going to estimate their garbage setup was going to be. Move the trash pull-out window to a later time. Adjust operations enforcement of compacting. Audit the implementation of the waste management plan. We're asking that these plans be okay prior to new buildings and rehab buildings getting their certificate of occupancy. A little bit further we go. Dedicate area for DOT. Dedicate areas of curb lanes for waste storage for all new buildings under 100 units, and for all existing buildings as envisioned by the Clean Curbs program. Examples of temporary areas are neighborhood loading zones or loading and unloading zones. We're also asking that surveys be done in different locations, perhaps to reschedule how sanitation picks up garbage. Now the case is most neighborhoods get picked up, garbage gets picked up 3 days a week. Recycling gets picked up on one of those days. Perhaps in some locations, and of course this is going to be a citywide proposal. Some locations, private homes, one-family homes, two-family homes, perhaps they can readjust and refocus pickup where they'll collect trash less times, pick up trash in more heavily congested areas in all the boroughs more often, and maybe pick up recycling more. So that's basically the story. We're looking forward for more comments. As Dale mentioned, this will go to exec, and I believe it'll come to the full board in September for ratification.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you so much, Alan, for walking us through that. I just have to
Try
say,
my best.
I'm impressed with this. I'm impressed with the kind of breadth of consideration, and like looking at DSNY to think about a different schedule, since we're stuck in a schedule that was formulated many years ago, and it basically for a different city. At the efforts towards, you know, organizing and containerization, and yeah, we don't have to live in the city that we live in right now, where like the sidewalks are piled with garbage, you know, more often than they should be. So I really appreciate everybody in the working group, Viren and David and Alan and Christine putting in this, and everybody else from other committees putting in this work, and you know, leading by example. Do we have any comments or questions or suggestions from the committee? I see Tina. I think you're still on mute, Tina.
I'm so sorry. Yes, I was. Thank you so much to everybody on this committee. It looks like a lot of work was done. My question related to, it looked like you had spoken to Brookfield, a developer, and there seems to be, in terms of the percentage of types of buildings in our area, a large percentage, I think you said this, are small. And I'm curious, does Brookfield Properties deal with small buildings, or were smaller building management companies spoken to get a feeling whether proposals are workable in smaller buildings?
We didn't, I don't believe we spoke to building owners regarding these proposals. We may have reached out to some. We did actually, the pilot program that is being started on 45th Street took about, I think, a good year and a half to 2 years for us to get buildings on that block, superintendents in that block, to go with the program that we were trying to put in place. They're worried about getting ticketed. They're worried about people piling garbage on their own piles or whatever. Until we finally worked out the situation with the locked bins and everything else, it took a bit of doing. I would assume that somewhere down the road, if the city does move ahead with some of these proposals, there will be time for building owners to come forward and raise some of these questions about how it's going to affect them, what they need to do, the financial aspects of them, maybe having to convert or do more work or hire more staff. And that's maybe something that we'll have to deal with when the time comes in terms of.
To clarify, Alan, with the pilot program, the buildings that are participating in the pilot program on 45th Street, those would be considered small buildings, or is there a mix?
I'm not that familiar, but I don't think there are any 12 or 14-story buildings.
Oh, Aaron, can you speak to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the majority of them are small buildings, and I think the way that sort of recommendations are crafted is to take into account that the smaller units do not have robust sort of management component. And in other words, to be able, for the committee to be able to interview such management companies that have multiple buildings was not an easy task. To find larger buildings and larger management companies was easier. So we never had the chance to sort of interview smaller building owners or smaller building management companies. But going back to sort of Tina's question, the suggestion that, or the recommendation for the smaller buildings is that since they may or may not have sufficient space within the building, and we do not have the data to sort of ask for anything as such, what is being a twofold sort of approach was recommended. One is change the sort of put out time. So from 4 p.m., instead of 4 p.m., make it 8 p.m., which means between 4 and 8 sidewalks are less littered and crowded with trash. And the second suggestion is containers being made available to smaller buildings, potentially in the curbside lane or even on the sidewalk where the sidewalk permits that, so that the smaller buildings can actually put their trash in those containers rather than on the sidewalk. So that's the sort of gist of it.
Great, thanks for clarifying that stuff, Aaron. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Okay, so we will, offer our input to exec when this comes up at the at September's executive meeting.
And if folks do, have some comments or some suggestions, please email them over to Christine and to David. And
perhaps to Tina's point, we can say, like, we can ask about like how building operators in all categories can be, how they're being engaged for feedback, whether it's a pilot program or whether it's through interviews or questionnaires. Kieran, did you have something else, or was that your hand up from before?
Yeah, no, it's a new hand. I just realized, the focus of this committee's work was interior storage space for trash collection. Our, as transportation committee, our focus is alleviating the pressure from the sidewalk. So
Right.
one of the asks that actually, I think there's the last page, which are additional recommendations. And I think one of the major recommendations that this committee would be actually very interested in is that increase the sort of frequency based on density in our neighborhoods. So in other words, Midtown Manhattan, where we have more commercial and more dense residential buildings, they should not have the sort of same regulation where number of trucks is like limited to 3, make it 6 times if you have to. Right? So instead of sort of asking for anything that is much harder to sort of for city to justify, what we're saying is let's ask for the low-hanging fruit. The 2 major asks. One was increase the frequency based on density, and the second one was potentially provide a pickup zone, pickup area in the curb lane, if possible and feasible. So what we can do as part of our committee's recommendation, we can sort of re-emphasize that ask, so to speak.
Yeah, there are definitely transportation impacts within this proposal. The curbside containerization and curbside disposition, and also like the frequency of pickup and the timing of the pickup, I think are all within our purview. So we'll address our comments when it comes up to largely to those issues. Great, thank you both for providing us with this information. And yeah, I'm just so happy you guys are working on this because it's such a knotted problem. Do we have any?
I have a quick comment. So we're not hosting exec in July. The next meeting would be the full board meeting, and then it would be the September full board meeting.
Right, I should have said September. Yeah. So yeah, the next thing that's happening is the social on Monday, and then we don't have a committee meeting in August. We'll have our next committee meeting in September. So I hope I see you all at the social. Is there any old business or new business to bring up?
I have new business just very quickly. I'm working on the Public Toilets Committee. And if I can put it on September's agenda of just what's going on, that would be great. Because
I'm sorry, could you say it again? Could you say it again, David?
I'm working on the Public Toilets Committee with a group of people from different community boards in the borough of Manhattan.
Oh.
And there's a lot going on. I'd like to report in September. The only thing is they are hiring people. I sent the information to Jesse. I was just waiting for him to send it to everyone else about hiring the youth over the summer.
Is this a transportation matter though?
It will be a transportation matter because it depends where they're going to put these public toilets. Are they going to put them on the sidewalk or are they going to put them on the streets?
Understood.
So it will come up. It will come up. In the past, Christina said that we have urged them to put it on the streets versus the sidewalk.
Yeah, in the road bed.
I'll go into more detail in September. I want to put them on the agenda.
Okay,
And
great. Will you hit me and Christine up with an email just like capturing your request so that I don't forget it?
Okay, and also Janine can remind Jesse to publicize the employment for youth over the summer. I sent them something.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, Jesse, but that would be Jesse Bodine, not Jesse Greenwald. Okay, any other new business? Okay, I'll take a motion to wrap it up.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. I'm sure there's a second. Thank you. All in favor? Yes, everyone's in favor. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll get to letter writing and I'll see you on, hopefully I'll see many of you on Monday, and we'll meet again in September.
Have a good night, everyone.